Welcome back, everybody. My name is Matt, and this is Flatland Relics. And speaking of relics, took the A out for a drive the other day. Got use of all three gears. Just wanted to test it out, see if it could maintain during, a street drive. And, well, it was so short-lived that here I am with a gasket pack from Felpro. In a matter of about 15-20 minutes, the head gasket started to leak a lot, and it was leaking a lot of antifreeze, which kind of worried me a little bit. So from there, I parked the vehicle and just started figuring out my plan, my approach for what I was going to do. And the first thing I needed to do was get a replacement head gasket in this ridiculously large box. So there's the gasket pack. Here, I'll show you the number if you're interested. It's not hard to find. I think I got it from Parts Geek, so it's really, you can get it from anywhere. It's not like specialty stuff. I was a little bummed realizing that the head gasket kind of blew up a little bit on me. But what I don't know is the age of the original head gasket. I don't know if it's original. It's probably been replaced. But when I was doing all the work trying to get the vehicle started, that's really rough on the head gaskets on those cars. If you're turning it over a lot and your timing's off and it's filling up and then popping off every now and then and firing erratically. So that's pretty rough on the head gasket. And I don't know. I kind of had a feeling I might have damaged it when I was trying to get the car running. So I'm not too shocked that I'm now into taking the head off and putting that nice new shiny copper gasket in there. And all that leads me to what the point of this episode is. The head has to come off the block. Now, having no knowledge of how the engine was taken care of or when the head's been off last, I have no idea what I'm walking into. So here I'm just dropping the oil, and I'm doing it cold, basically. I didn't want to run the car again once I realized there was damage to the head gasket. The fluids are already mixing enough. Here's the original distributor that I took out. Very rusty. And then here's the one I just put in a month ago, which was oiled. So I'm thinking maybe I'm getting some antifreeze in where the distributor shaft goes in. Well, there it is, all cleaned up. That didn't take long. But yeah, I just sanded it real quick and got it looking good again. So here I already pulled the distributor. Here the plugs are out. The nuts on the studs were not that big of a deal, which makes me think somebody may have been in this recently. Not really sure, but just using a good breaker bar and getting some leverage. When I pulled the nuts off, I did get 3 studs to come out with the nut, not because I was trying, but that's just how it happened. So, you need to take the water inlet off. And then also need to drain the antifreeze. I did notice I put 3 gallons of antifreeze in, and I've driven the car around the yard a few times and ran it here and there and took it out for one 20-minute drive, and I'm down to a gallon of antifreeze. So we're running hot, and the antifreeze is dissolving. Here I'm just adding a little hose to the spigot on the bottom of the connector tube there, and it's a lot easier to collect and doesn't spray all over the drivetrain if you just use a little hose. I ended up cutting the hose a little shorter because it was so long it was kind of looping back up, which is a pain in the butt. But cut yourself the right length and just, throw a hose clamp on and let it drain the easy way. There you can see everything. So I decided to take the water pump out. You got to loosen the top rods that hold the radiator mount. And you got to put some cardboard there to protect your radiator. So you can see this thing's pretty crunchy on the inside. I don't know if that is a mouse leg or an old rag. I don't know what that is. But there's something connected to that, and it's like corroded to the actual propeller for the water pump. So, yeah, that's seen better days. It spins good, though. It's got plenty of grease on the bearing, that's for sure. So, having not taken the head off of one of these engines yet, I really wasn't sure what I was in for, and I had to just try one thing at a time. I knew about the rope trick, so here I'm going to try that. I do believe I cut the rope too short the first time I did this. I think I put like a 3 or 4 foot section in there, and it's not long enough. It didn't actually pack out the cylinder as much as I needed it to. So something to think about if you try the rope trick is they say like 8 to 10 foot of rope, which later on I ended up cutting some longer pieces and adding them in there. But giving it a try here, and some places you look up the info on how to do this and it's all, yeah, you can do this with the hand crank. I had absolutely no luck with that. And it just hit a point where the engine wouldn't crank because the rope got caught up, I don't know, in a valve. I'm not really even sure. So here's the other thing. Just soak everything, using some automatic transmission fluid. And then I mix a little penetrant on top of that. And just kind of wanted to loosen everything up the best I could. Like I said, at this point, I still really wasn't sure what I was in for. And this turned out to take quite a few days to get this head off. But I learned a lot from this. And if I was ever to do this again, I would attack it a different way. Now, I haven't taken the 2 frontmost studs where the water pump is out of the head yet. So I didn't realize that even though I'm loosening everything up, the head's not going to go anywhere. And of course, had to resort to heat. Absolutely, if you got something and everything's kind of corroded together, you can just bake everything inside and keep spraying it. Between heating, hammering, and spraying penetrant oil, I noticed a lot of the studs in the back, as time went on, the penetrant oil went from sitting on top to actually going down into the stud, in between the stud and the sleeve and the head. And that was a win. That was an important thing to see, Had to pay close attention to notice that, but after the second or third day, it started dropping down into the head. And that was great. That was like a small victory for me. I do want to mention one safety thing. You can see I'm running a small torch right next to the fuel lines in the carburetor that probably has some fuel in it. Something to think about. You're leaning over right there. You're putting a lot of heat on stuff. You're right next to the fuel lines. That could become a catastrophic event if you're not very careful with how you work that torch. And if you're not comfortable doing that, just empty the gas tank and take that fuel line out of the way. Just get it out of the way. It's not worth letting that blow up in your face, because it will. If that gets caught on fire, you're in trouble. But I didn't have any issues with it. I did kind of keep the torch from pushing a lot of sparks or flames down between the block and the exhaust manifold. That way stuff didn't hit and bounce off the carb a lot. You can see, just spraying. I was trying to lift with my chain fall. I was trying to lift the head off, but I didn't realize those front 2 studs were kind of not letting me do it. Like I said, there was a lot I had to learn and a lot of the process I had to go through. I talked to my mechanic neighbor across the street once or twice about this, and he eventually gives me a hand doing some stuff That's not on video. We actually didn't film that, sorry. And I made some calls to the older mechanics and my dad and, asked some questions. Am I doing this right? I wanted to make sure I didn't damage the head. Everything you read says don't put a pry bar or a screwdriver in between the head and the block. Those are mating surfaces. If you scratch them, you're going to have a leak no matter what, like all the time. So you have to be very careful with that, and it gets frustrating. After days of going back and forth, I was pulling my hair out, just trying to decide what's the next step and what's the right step to get this thing off. But here I was headed in completely the wrong direction. I wanted to do the rope trick, and I wanted to try that out again. So I wanted to use the car's starter and the crank power that the car had to use the rope trick, and that meant putting the water pump back on. I had cleaned and wire wheeled the whole water pump by now. The whole back of it was really nice and clean. I scraped the gasket off and everything. Just did a little bit of prep work on that while the heat and the CRC was going into the head. But here I'm putting that back. I'm going to put the belt back on, and I'm going to try and basically use the starter to push that head off, to just lift it up a little bit. The one crux to all this is I still have all the studs in. And the studs have all kinds of dirt and corrosion, holding them together, holding them tight to the head. And there's not a lot of tolerance. Like, the head doesn't slide around. If the studs are in, you can't really move it that much. And in hindsight, rather than taking the time to do all of this with the rope trick and putting everything back together after taking the water pump off, putting it back on, it was a lot of steps where I feel like I should have just pulled the studs from the very beginning. But something in my brain was telling me, hey, you can just pull the head off and lift it straight off and straight up off the studs. But that's really not a feasible idea. That comes to me later on after more discussions with other people and more work towards trying to get the head off and numerous failures. The failures that I had throughout this process are absolutely what got me to getting the head off. And with this older equipment, you really don't know. You don't know if it's completely rusted on. You don't know the condition of anything underneath. Like, I know this car ran, so I know it wasn't horrible, but that head might not have been off for 50 or 60 years. So if the studs are rusted and they're all corroded to the head, like, you don't know. So I was trying to just kind of work my way in and try what I knew to try first. And here I'm setting up to do the rope trick again. The rope trick didn't really work, even the second time. I spent the better part of 2 or 3 hours cranking the starter and turning the engine back, and you'll see that very shortly. And the head never lifted at all. Like, the seal never broke. I didn't see any gap between the head, the gasket, and the block. So, to me, I couldn't get the rope trick to work. Maybe we'll try it again on a later date when I put a different head on the engine. If I ever do that with this car, I might keep this car, like, actually pretty original, besides stuff I changed to make it just a little more drivable. So here I'm checking for TDC, and then I'm also moving it further past TDC so I know the 1 piston and the 4 piston are down so I can stuff the cylinder bore with rope. I cut about 2 8-foot pieces and just work them in there. This is tedious. Take your time. It's a pain. You got to use a screwdriver or a little pry bar or something to cram everything in there, and it gets stuck, and you got to take it out and start again and do it again and push it back in. It's a process just like anything else. But you can tell when the rope's going in the right spot because it just kind of keeps sliding, goes in there pretty good. So if you are going to try the rope trick, it goes in cylinder 1 and cylinder 4. I guess the idea is to evenly push the head up by forcing the rope up towards the head on the upstroke of both those cylinders. Like I said, I tried it for a couple hours with the starter, and I got absolutely no luck. Maybe on an engine where the head's been off recently, the studs are new, everything's kind of lubed up a little better than this one was, that might work. But I feel like if you're leaking coolant or have any moisture on those studs and they start to rust, it's going to be an uphill battle. So there's both the 1 and the 4 cylinder stuff with the rope. I got the water pump back on. I got the belt back on. Leave enough rope so you can pull them back out. So here we go. Yep. You don't get much of a crank. Obviously, it's only going to go partial spin, because it doesn't even turn all 4 cylinders. So I was just turning it back by hand, going back in the cab, hitting the starter, getting out, turning it back by hand, going back in the cab, hitting the starter. Repeated this process for literally a couple hours. Probably started running the battery down. And to be honest, I don't think I got anywhere. I don't think it helped pop anything off at all. So if somebody else knows a better trick for that, let me know. Say something in the comments, or if you ever even got that to work, let me know, because I haven't spoken to anybody who's ever gotten that to work. So, and here, just resorting to beating the head a little bit, trying to loosen it up, trying to keep everything sprayed, whatever I can do, any step in the process to try and get this head off. Looking back, it's really easy to say, man, I should have just pulled all the studs first. But I wanted to try and just see if I could break it loose. I didn't think that the studs were going to impede the head from popping up, but I think they did. Knowing what I know now, I think they did. I was also being a vicious cheapskate in not wanting to buy new studs, but you really shouldn't use something like that twice. Like head bolts, once they get torqued, they get stretched. I'm sure it's the same with the studs, so I buckled down and bought a stud pack for this, and I got a stud puller after 4 days of trying to get it off the other way. This would have been a lot simpler had I ever done this before, but I haven't, so I had to go through all the steps, like it or not. I had to learn this one the hard way. And from what I read, nobody said, oh yeah, pull all the studs and get them out of your way. Absolutely. That's the absolute first step. Nobody says that anywhere. So maybe that's something that's already known. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Like I said, looking back, just pulling the studs probably would have been a better idea. So here I'm trying to turn it again, and I don't know, I get like 3/4 of a turn on the fan blade, and that was not enough to kick it up at all. I don't know. Am I supposed to put the spark plugs back in? Because am I supposed to have the compression on my side on this? I'm not sure. But like I said, I couldn't get the rope trick to work. That block actually ended up disintegrating. I was hammering a chunk of 2x4 and hammering on the end grain, and it was just like falling apart in my hand. I don't think the block was doing much of anything anyway, but it just gave me time to think. I was tapping it without the block, but way softer with that. Sometimes I hit it pretty good with the rubber mallet, but when I use the steel, the mini sledge, I kind of take it easy. So here we're back again, a little more heat. I did notice as I was going around on the head around the holes that the studs stick through, there would be a point where anything inside there would just kind of boil out. And I just noticed that was happening a lot more in the back, where the studs had a lot more soot when they finally did come out. So here's a little stud puller I got. Nothing fancy. It was like $25. Absolutely worth it, considering I'm going to have to do this again when we get to the Power Wagon engine. Yeah, you just clamp it on, you tighten it down, and it has like internal pliers or grabbers, whatever you want to call them, that clamp onto the stud, and they mar the stud pretty good. They definitely ruin the threads, and you can see where it gets crushed by the tool, so something to keep in mind. It was nice to use the bigger wrench and get some leverage. Some of these came out with a little bit of strength, and some of them I had to really crank on them. Decided to jump up and use the big ratchet. It's just nice when things kind of flow a little easier and you're not pushing your hardest on a tiny wrench, hoping you don't punch something metal and rip all the skin off your knuckle. I do want to take the time to throw a shout out to my neighbor. Greg came over and helped me one weeknight. I was having a hard time with this right before I went and got the stud puller tool, and he came over to check on me to see how it was going, and he was like, come on, let's start pulling studs, let's go. And he gave me a hand, and we had to use the pickle fork and kind of pressure some of them up, because once you got the threaded part out, they're still stuck in there because they were pretty heavily corroded. As you can see, a lot of the studs now are out, and that was thanks to Greg giving me a hand, but there was a few that we couldn't get out, and he had to go eat dinner, so I just said, you know what? I'm not going to hold you up. This is going to take a few more hours. I'll try and get them myself, or maybe we'll wait for the next day. And I got a little impatient and just started going for it. Eventually, they did all come out. Some of them took a lot more persuasion than others. You know, patience. You got to put a little pressure underneath them. I was using the pickle fork for that. I'll use that again later. This one was not too bad of a struggle. From this angle, it's easy to see that the water pump inlet still has both the big tall studs sticking up. Excuse me. Here I'm using the bigger breaker ratchet, and like I said, applying some pressure from underneath. I will say that there isn't like one absolute way to attack this. You kind of have to use a combination of a few different tools, some leverage. Everything's all sprayed and kind of slippery, so you got to be careful. And when you're leaning on stuff like that and using leverage, and don't lean on the exhaust manifold. I don't know if that's blazingly obvious or not, but it's something you might feel tempted to do, but you can't do that because you'll just start snapping stuff. And that's, you don't want it to go like that. So here, wherever I'm hammering down, I'm going against the flat part of the head, and I feel like that could take what I was doing without having cracks or without splitting. But again, you got to use your better judgment as soon as you're leaning on other parts, and just like you got to use your judgment when you're using the torch. So here, one of the things you should focus on with this stud puller is getting it tight. It's got to be really tight. So I do the double wrench sometimes for a little more leverage like that, and that helped. You really want to bite down on them, and then you want to try and walk that stud out. And the ones in the back, they put up a fight, and I eventually get them, but they took a lot longer than the other ones, and I was pretty warmed up at this point. So just be aware that if you've had a leak for a long time, these things are going to put up a struggle, you know. It's almost like they don't want to get taken out, but you got to take them out. So you got to work against them until they give. And halfway through this process, I was starting to really lose my patience. I didn't know the correct steps, and I had to work through what worked and what didn't work. And you can see everything in this video that I'm doing. Like I said, it's not just one thing. There isn't like one foolproof process. You got to really just attack it and figure out what the next move is on the fly. There's no music in this video. I could probably squeeze a song or two in right now. I don't think I'm going to do that, though. To me, this was a little more serious of an episode. The workload in this video is a little more stressful. It's nice to get through this, though. Eventually, the head does come off. Sorry to ruin the video, but that's, that was the goal, and we get there. It did take days longer than I thought. And I don't know. I had to learn an entire new process for how to do all this. But as you can see, doing the pickle fork for leverage from underneath again, that really helped. That helped a lot more than I thought it would. And that was a suggestion from my neighbor, Greg. He's like, let's just smack that in there and put some pressure under it. Because even once the threads roll out of the block, those back studs don't want to come out. And when I pulled them, they have like a just totally sooty, burned up whatever around them. I don't know if it was corrosion and it just turned black from me torching it for a couple days on and off again for, a few hours there. Like, I don't know if everything just toasted under there. I don't know. But they look different than they thought when I took them out. I thought they were going to be really rusty, but they weren't like really rusty. They were more, it was like more soot. I don't know if we just burned it all or not, but probably. Here doing the combination of putting something under the pickle fork to get a little better leverage. Once the stud gets up a certain height, the fork doesn't really have any leverage unless you, there you go. Unless you put something under it, and you can get a nice lift. These back two studs, they took a long time. It was a lot of fighting back and forth, and sometimes I feel like I would turn the stud puller and it would just spin and spin and spin. It was hard to tell if it was even moving up at certain points. But with a little prying and, just keep working the process, and these will come out over time. It just... They're not going to come out when you want them to come out. They're going to come out when they're ready. I was just there to try and help move it along. I am really happy that they all came out. I was worried about breaking one. It's kind of like always in the back of my mind is, man, I hope we don't snap one off. Either this one or the one that I pull after this was starting to lean a little weird when I was turning the ratchet, and I thought it's because the bolt was snapping. And like I said, I was definitely worried, and it turned out I think it was just bending a little bit, or the puller was bending. And here I loosened the puller up so I could drop it down, because I was starting to hit the electrical box there on the firewall, and that was not helping me at all. I didn't want anything to stop it from coming up. because I had enough problems just trying to get these out. Sitting there pushing against the electrical box was not the move. Was able to wedge a little wire brush in there real good. Didn't have to worry about it falling. Yeah, these two in the rear, they definitely fought a lot more. They hung on really good. So this back one had more rust than any of the other ones. But see how it's partially burnt? So I think I just, whatever was packed in there, I think I just cooked it. But that one definitely had a little more rust than the other ones. So something to think about when I put all this back together. So here I thought I was down to the last stud and felt really good about myself there for a minute. And then a little later on, I realized that there's two more in the front. And they had to come out also if I had any plans of actually lifting this head off the engine block. I can't stress enough that this whole process involves a ton of patience. You want to just cram something under there and pop the head off the block, and you can't do that. You absolutely can't do that. I had gotten the head to lift a little bit in the front, which is slightly visible if you look right next to the exhaust manifold there. But, I mean, not a lot. I'm talking a fingernail, at best. So I definitely had to change plans and get all these studs out. I thought just heating it and hitting it was going to work. I thought the rope trick was going to work. And to be honest, none of that worked. It was just getting in there and removing all these studs was the method that I missed in the beginning, but quickly realized when I started taking them out, that was what needed to happen. This back stud that I'm working on now definitely did something interesting. As I was walking the stud out of the block, it was so corroded to the head that it was just lifting the head up with it. So I was starting to get a gap in the back by the head and the block between those two. And it was just basically, the stud was not able to slide up through, so it was just taking the head with it. I think I show that a little better in the near future. So here I still thought I could use the chain fall, but those two really long studs in the front by the water pump, they were a problem that I wasn't even aware of yet. This far into the game, I didn't realize it. And here I had gotten some positive lift on the head and was like, whoa, what's going on? Why can't I get this? So eventually I have an epiphany and I look up the amount of studs that need to come out. And I believe it's 14. And here I'm working on the 12th one right here. So I thought I had it, but there was two more. The other thing I'm going to suggest is not to use an impact when you're doing this stud puller tool. You really want to be able to feel the control. You want to feel it against the stud when you're trying to back them out. You get in there and just start hitting the impact wrench, and you're kind of flying blind at that point. You can't tell if you're slowly breaking one of the studs or not. And with the hand ratchet or the hand wrench, you can actually feel that. And that's one of the reasons why I don't use an impact wrench on a lot of stuff. I mean, would I save a little time? Sure. But I don't know. I don't want to start snapping bolts off and snapping studs off and have to get into dealing with all that, because that's a whole nother ball game. And you can try your best at your home shop to fix that. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So it's just something I keep in mind. So here, just trying to get the head to lift a little bit. I knew it was loose, and it was kind of driving me nuts that the head wouldn't just pop off like it was supposed to. I'm shaking it, and nothing happens. I put the chainful on it, still nothing happens. And that, like I said, I had a little epiphany, like, hey, what about these two long studs in the front? Maybe they're really hanging everything up. Smarter guy might have went and watched the video on how to take the head off the car, but as usual, I kind of just dived in and worked with what I knew and tried to learn along the way. It's a good way to do stuff for me so far, but I can understand how it's kind of a bad habit, and sometimes it kind of gets me jammed up. Like here, where I look like an idiot trying to take this head off, and I still haven't pulled the last two studs out of the block. So, like I said, it was a learning lesson for me on this one, but I'm glad, because now I feel like I have a pretty good process for doing this. And I am using a bigger pry bar right here, but I can't say enough, like, I'm not putting a lot of pressure on that. It's very gentle. I'm not trying to get in there and really pry. I'm just seeing if it lifts. Does it lift anywhere? I can't remember if this is exactly where it hit, that there was something holding in the front still. I'm like, that should have lifted up by now, and it didn't. And that's what prompted me to look up the amount of studs and figure out that I still had two more to take out. One thing I do kind of like about this video now that I'm editing it is it does show that this process doesn't happen fast. You have to show a little perseverance. You have to push through. And I had it a couple times where I even thought about selling the car, but hey, there you go. Finally, the head is off. And that was quite the victory for me. A lot of hours in the shop. You guys got to remember, you don't see all the stuff that happens when the camera's not running. Let's get rid of this old head gasket. I don't even want to look at it. It's a struggle to get to it, and I threw it out immediately. I do end up just covering everything with a little more penetrant oil. I want to keep everything wet while the head's off. I don't want surface rust building up, and eventually I'm going to have to sand across that block probably, so... That's it for this week. If you learned anything, great. If you just come to watch and see what I'm up to, that's cool too. Thanks for staying this far if you watched the whole video. Like I said, this was a victory for me, and in the next video, we'll put a new head gasket on and put the head back on.